Good afternoon, and welcome to the third of 5 conversations with retired U.S. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. Please welcome to the stage a leader in public health and civil rights law, founder and inaugural director of GW's newly chartered Equity Institute, Dean and Harold H. Green Professor of GW Law, Dr. Dana Bowen Matthew.
Good afternoon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am thrilled to welcome you here for another Only at GW moment. These are a series of exclusive interviews. We began last year creating what is essentially a comprehensive oral history of the arc of a great leader's career. Justice Breyer's an illustrious leader and an incredible, impactful person in the, American history. However, I am here to introduce the person who has made this possible. This amazing series would not have been possible without the vision and tireless effort of Dean Alan Morrison. He has been a good friend of Justice Breyer's and Mr. Feinberg's for more than 40 years. So it's my great pleasure just to tell you a little bit about my colleague and friend, Alan Morrison. He is our Lerner Family Associate Dean for Public Interest and Public Service, and among his many accomplishments are that he co-founded the Public Citizen Litigation Group with Ralph Nader. This was founded in 1972 and he was director for more than 25 years. Dean Morrison has argued 20 cases before the United States Supreme Court, including victories in Goldfarb versus Virginia State Bar, which is the case that held lawyers subject to the antitrust laws for using minimum fee schedules. He also argued Virginia State Board of Pharmacy versus Virginia Citizens Consumer Council, making commercial speech subject to the First Amendment. And he argued INS versus Chadha, striking down over 200 federal laws containing the legislative veto as a violation of separation of powers. Now, why do I tell you that? Because this illustrious career has been recognized, and I want to share with you that earlier this month, he was selected to receive the National Law Journal's 2023 Lifetime Achievement Award in recognition of this top litigation and appellate work. So when you welcome Alan Morrison to the stage, you welcome the third of 3 amazing giants of American legal history. Please welcome Alan Morrison.
Thank you, I guess, Dean Matthews. The program contains the biographies of both Justice Breyer and Ken Feinberg, so I won't say very much, but I do want to say a couple words about Justice Breyer, who served on the Court of Appeals for 14 years, the Supreme Court for 28 years, and is now in what he calls retirement. But of course, he's not sitting around relaxing as he was entitled to do. He is teaching seminars at Harvard Law School both last year and this year in both semesters. He's co-teaching them. He has written a book which is coming out this coming year about judging, and we're hoping to have that be the focus of our spring conversation with the Justice. He has been traveling and giving talks most recently in Great Britain, France, Israel, and Canada. This is the third of the interviews that we have here. He is probably going to go on a trip with the Pritzker Architecture Committee to the Far East. One would need a computer, high speed, to keep track of Justice Breyer's efforts. All this is in his retirement, which I suppose we need a new definition for that term. Ken Feinberg I met a long time ago when I was an assistant U.S. attorney in New York and Ken was interviewing for the job. I worked with him when he was working for Senator Kennedy, and then I came to know him best in his work as a mediator and special master in a whole range of cases, the most significant of which is the assignment he had to divide up the 9/11 Victims' Compensation Fund, which is the subject of his book, What is Life Worth, and the movie Worth, both of which I recommend to you. Ken has been involved in numerous other similar situations in which he has been the mediator and in some cases the administrator of these funds. He is a special friend of George Washington Law School, as he's been at many of our forums. He's given talks, eagerly participating in our panel discussions, and he has been a true friend of mine and of George Washington. So I am delighted and honored to have them both here. So let's give a special GW welcome to Stephen Breyer and Kenneth Feinberg. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Most of those cheers and welcomes, I am sure, relate to Kennedy alumni.
Quite a few.
Who worked in Senate Judiciary Committee, personal staff, and other Kennedy committees. I want to start this interview, first of all, by, I don't want to single out a lot of people here, but I do have to single out two people for different reasons. Tom Sussman couldn't be here today. He's traveling in Europe. But Tom Sussman, if he was here, would vent and tell stories about how Stephen and Ken were hired back in the 1970s. In a very real sense, we both worked for Tom Sussman for a few of the years that we were with Senator Kennedy. The other person I want to reference who deserves a medal is Camille Byros, who's here somewhere. You'll recall, some of you, that Camille worked as an aide in the same little cubbyhole that was our office for Stephen Breyer at the same time. In that little cubbyhole, Stephen Breyer, Ken Feinberg, Tom Sussman, Phil Bakes, and eventually David Boies. And she maintained her sanity. So I just wanted to mention her as somebody who will remember those crazy days. We were all in.
It wasn't a cubbyhole, it was a closet.
A closet.
Let's be honest about it. And you had to push the brooms aside.
All right. Now, we want to start off today, since Justice Breyer has said on a number of public occasions that the greatest job he ever held was chief counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Anything after that was an afterthought, in a sense. And I want to ask Justice Breyer the obvious first question: how did it come about? How was it that a Harvard law professor, well established in Cambridge at Harvard Law School, ended up being employed, hired, and working for Senator Kennedy? How did that all happen, that you went from the world of academia to Washington and the Senate committee?
I had worked the summer before for Archie Cox when he was running the Watergate. I had a responsibility to figure out which we never figured out, what was the antitrust part of that. And I think Archie, whom I got to know pretty well, is a great man. I think he recommended me to Senator Kennedy. And Senator Kennedy and Carrie Parker I knew, who really was Senator Kennedy. He really had figured out what the different issues were and what the position was and so forth. Well, I knew Carrie because I knew his brother. All right, so I knew people there who probably recommended me.
But what prompted you to even think about
Well, that's Harvard's attitude. Harvard's attitude was you could be, a deputy assistant secretary of housing and urban development, in which case you would have an engraving for your Christmas card and say Mr. and Mrs. Assistant Secretary, and that was worthy of a Harvard professor. But nobody thought, oh, worthy of a Harvard professor to go and work on the staff of a senator? Well, Harvard was wrong. It was
again.
Yeah.
Why were you intrigued? Why were you
Why?
intrigued by this?
Why? Because it was so interesting. I remember going down, Senator Kennedy invited me to his house for dinner over in McLean. And he showed me the pictures of the family, you know. And we were that's our generation. Our generation is the Kennedy generation. Every one of us knows where he was when Jack Kennedy was assassinated. I remember driving under that bridge in Cambridge and hearing that news. I remember when I was a law clerk walking down the hall of the Justice Department on the first floor, and because my boss, Arthur Goldberg, sent me over there to find out something or other, I don't remember what. But I walked outside into the hallway, and there was Bobby Kennedy, and he was walking down with 3 friends of his, and when he walked down the hall, for me, he glittered. He glittered. That was the world. That world of the Kennedys was going to be our new generation, and it was going to help America. And there's no way that I can think of the Kennedys without thinking of that.
Now, when you came down and visited with Senator Kennedy, did you first meet with Kerry or Tommy Sussman or anybody else, or was this right away in McLean, Kennedy, or did you first go through, introduce yourself?
I might have met with Kerry, I'm not sure. But I think it was pretty much, we went to his house for dinner. He showed me all the pictures of his family and so forth, and his children, and he was responsible for that family now. And he was going to become chief counsel. I was chief counsel. He was going to become chairman of the Administrative Practices Subcommittee of the Senate Committee on the Judiciary. They were in charge of administrative law. I'm really surprised that a lot of you have not become very, very interested in administrative law. I mean, it is a fabulous topic. The 5 people who teach it in the United States of America love it, and no one else has ever heard of it. But in any case, that was what he was going to be in charge of, and I also taught administrative law, so he wanted me to come down there. I couldn't do that because I was teaching, and I didn't want to lose my job teaching. But I said, why don't we do this? Why don't I come down several days a week and keep my job? And then we had a list of things that we were going to have hearings on. And we went through the list. And things like, because when I'd been working on the Watergate, there were a few problems with American Airlines and campaign contributions, and there were a whole bunch of problems on different things. And one of the things on that list, which I knew about because I was teaching the subject, was airline deregulation. Yeah, what's that? At that time, nobody knew. Everybody knows now because they're uncomfortable for 4 hours a week. All right, yeah. He said, well, why do we do that? Everybody thinks of the CAB, Civil Aeronautics Board, they're fabulous. What's wrong with them? Of course they thought they were fabulous. All the people who thought that were lawyers. And they had wonderful procedures. Fabulous. I said, the problem is that it costs twice as much as it should to fly from New York to California. I'd learned that from a few economists. And what we said, we had the hearings, you know, is the business traveler happy? Are you happy to have a seat on which to put your briefcase? Yes, you're happy. You aren't happy because there is no such seat anymore. But are they happy? Yes. But do they know they are paying full fare for the briefcase? He thought that was a good subject. A good subject. When we went up to Boston, and we had hearings in his office up there, there was a picket line because there were people who were worried and didn't want to see the schools integrated. And one of them came in. They were being integrated. Judge Garrett, he was integrating them. And Louisa Day Hicks didn't want them integrated. So Louisa Day Hicks shows up in our hearing. And this was good on Kennedy's part. He thought of that. She said to Senator Kennedy in front of a lot of people there, she said, Senator Kennedy, why are you having hearings on airlines? Yeah. I've never been able to fly. And he said, that's why I'm having the hearing. And it's true, you won't believe this, but I can't resist. The fares today are, and they can measure them very accurately, they're one half what they were on average in 1974 when we went into this. They have fallen. But anyway.
Now, two questions
Yes.
about the process.
Yes.
You were safely, you had a desk with Sussman and
I did have a desk. I think
subcommittee.
it was in the airline hearing days. We had a desk in the broom closet. That's where it was.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now,
And Senator Heflin later on, when I became chief counsel of judiciary.
we'll get to that.
All right.
Now, a very interesting political science question.
Yes.
When you came down here and as you worked on Airline dereg, you developed this view, which important, that staffers really should focus on one issue. Instead of there's 9 issues or there's 12 issues, you really immersed yourself in one issue, airline deregulation.
That's right.
And you reached the conclusion later on, even when you were chairman of the committee, chief counsel of the committee, that that idea that you really master a subject rather than a pot of different issues. Why was that your view that staffers should really be focused rather than on a potpourri of issues?
So that's the senator. Why? Because it didn't take too long to notice the following. You start to accomplish something. I don't care what it is. If it's going to work for people and make them better off, he will give you his time. And he will give you his time whatever it costs him. And if you focus on one thing and really understand the subject, you're more likely to get somewhere. So when we began to get somewhere, and prices began to fall, and we began to see that this would actually work out better for the average person in America who previously couldn't fly, all of a sudden he's spending the time. And by I mean spending the time, I mean he learned how to set an airline rate. That's something no one at that time knew and probably doesn't know now. But nonetheless, he learned it. And when the Civil Aeronautics Board came out there in front of us, and he said to Mr. O'Melia, I think, "But why did you set the rate over here so high?" He didn't have an idea. Kennedy knew how to set the rate. O'Melia didn't, all right? He knew the subject. And you know the subject, you see the weaknesses, you see where there's room for improvement, you see where it's possible to show a little strength, and fine. And that's how Kennedy was.
Let me follow up on that with a question that I think people around the world have asked at various times. Senator Kennedy, what was the secret of his legislative success? What did you learn from Senator Kennedy? What did I learn? What did others here learn from Senator Kennedy that was the recipe for being successful and effective as a staffer?
No. Listen. That's what you did. That's why they made 2 movies about you. That's what you did. Listen. And you learned that pretty quickly. Here I have, where did I put my cup? Did I leave it out there? Oh, shoot. My law clerks made a cup with some of the things.
Oh, I don't know.
No, they made it with some of the things he used to say. And one of those things, give other people the credit. Credit is a weapon. Use it. Now, how does that work? Take 20%. 20% of what you want. Better than nothing. Better to get 20% of what you're trying for than it is to get 0% and be a big hero to your normal supporters. Boy, we saw that a lot. So the first thing you do when you're trying to get somewhere and you see, say, people in a different party or maybe sometimes in the same party blocking you, you go and you talk to them and you find out what they're thinking. You know, I tell that to the 5th graders and I tell that to the high school students. You go and listen. Oh, here's the cup. Senator Kennedy's life lessons. 1, what is he saying? That's what we used to ask. Kennedy would tell us, he'd say, go work it out. We'd say, what's he talking about? All right, anyway, keep it simple. The perfect is the enemy of the good. That's where I am now. You go and listen to them and find out. Don't do all the talking. You just say, what do you think and get them to talk as much as they will. And if they talk enough, you will find that sooner or later, they'll say something you really agree with. And as soon as they say something you actually agree with on this issue, you say, that's pretty good. Let's see if we can work with that. And you work with it. And maybe you get 20 or 30%. And maybe there's something of a success. Because it says right here, the perfect is the enemy of the good. You're not going to get the perfect. Maybe you'll get that 40% or 50% if you're really lucky, or 30%. Take it. And if your own side criticizes you because you only got 30%, that's better than zero. And don't be the hero to them. Get the 30%. Get the 40%. And when the press comes around, as they did in many things which he was involved in, and they would say, Senator Kennedy, you really did a good job here. He would say, don't thank me. Thank Orrin Hatch. He came up with a key way of cooperating here. He helped bring this thing along. You see, credit is a weapon. And he used to tell us, look, if it's successful and you get something you believe is actually helpful, there'll be plenty of credit to go around. Don't worry about it. And if it's not successful, who wants the credit? And my goodness, we heard him say that a lot. And he can't live up to that all the time. He has to get elected. I mean, you can't say 100% all the time. But that was the basic idea. And I say, that is where we are at this moment. And that's what I tell those students. You think somebody is saying something terrible and you really disagree with them, don't go home and play blackjack or something, whatever you play at home. You don't know, on the screen these days, they may be playing blackjack for money, for all I know. But the fact is, you listen and find out what they think and try to work that in and see if you can't find something to agree with. And then that's called compromise, it used to be. And the Senate, when we were there, certainly worked that way. And I say, whether it's the Supreme Court, or whether it's the Library Commission, or whether it's whatever you're participating in public life or private life, that is a fairly good way of proceeding.
I remember you talk about Senator Kennedy and his principles. A lot of you remember, but I'll tell you an interesting example of it. Senator Kennedy, a couple of times, would take Stephen Breyer and Feinberg down to see the chairman, Senator Eastland, and Senator Thurmond, and Herman Talmadge of Georgia. And Senator Kennedy would say, come on, guys, I want you to come along, you'll learn something. And he went down and talked to Eastland and Talmadge and Sam Ervin, some others, about judgeships and give and take of judgeships. And then we'd leave, and Kennedy would put his arm around Stephen and say, well, Stephen, I bet you never learned that at Harvard Law School.
Oh, he did used to say that.
Bet you never learned
one
that
day,
at Harvard Law School.
Well, every morning we would discuss with Thurman's staff how we're going to work that day.
Well, let me ask that question.
Yeah.
There came a time when you became chief counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee under Kennedy. And people often ask, how did Kennedy manage as chairman to make that committee function effectively? And I'd like you to explain the recipe that Kennedy relied on you as chief counsel. How did that work that there wasn't disruption, polarization, and argument?
Well, you were part of that. Every morning, the three of us, Ken, me, and Emory Sneeden, who'd been a JAG general, would have breakfast.
He was the chief counsel, minority counsel for Thurmond.
Yeah, that's right. And we would have breakfast every morning, and we would plan the day. And he came along with this. We would say our slogan for the Judiciary Committee is open conniving, openly arrived at. We didn't want to have any secrets, no tricky things that we wouldn't tell them about in advance, so they'd have a chance to And it worked pretty well. One day, in July, I think, Thurman said to Emory, don't talk to Breyer and Feinberg anymore. I mean, today. We're approaching an election, and we don't want total cooperation here. We want to win the election. And so we did not meet that morning, and there was an executive session, and the executive session was about judges, and before you know it, people began to get into real arguments. And I remember Senator Culver was shaking his fist under Senator Thurman's face, and it was not particularly great. And Kennedy did turn to me then, and he said, well, what did they teach you about how to deal with this at Harvard? He said, yeah, okay. So what he did was he said, all right, we're going to set up some subcommittees to deal with these judges. Birch, that was Birch Bayh, you be chair of the first, and you take Strom with you, and then John Culver, you chair of the second, and go on. And they all went off in their subcommittees. They never had to meet, because by that time the staff was all meeting, and things got worked out. Work it out. That's what he wanted. He wanted people to work things out so you could get something through, and you could get something that would be of benefit. And that's what we did with airlines, and that's what we did with other things. We didn't work them all out, by the way, but we worked out quite a few.
Now, other people are here, like Burt Wides, for example.
Yeah.
He's in the audience.
And Craig, I said, look.
Greg Craig, but what
Carolyn Croft.
was the judiciary confirmation process? Never mind the Supreme Court.
Oh, it was Wides.
We'll
I
get
think
to
Wides
that.
is-
We'll get to that.
Yeah, and Tommy.
But how did it work?
It worked pretty well. What we did was we had every nominee that was sent up. We confirmed about close to 200 Carter judges, Carter nominees. But when somebody would be sent up, we would have Duke Short, who was Thurman's investigator, and Burt Wides, or Tommy sometimes, and they would jointly investigate the background of that person, and they would write a joint report. And it almost always was the two of them. And since it was the two of them, and they agreed on the result, we almost always got the person through and confirmed. Though there were about, I think, of the 200 or so, there were 17 or 18 that did not get through, and I think they should not have.
Did you deal directly with Duke and Senator Thurman or Senator Haruska, or the senator nominating or
We
urging
mostly
the
deal through
nomination?
staff. We mostly would deal
With staff,
Yes.
rather than directly with the senator.
Yeah, I mean, occasionally, the first thing I'm there, Senator Kennedy takes me into Senator Simpson's office. I'm sure you remember Senator
Alan Simpson of
yes,
Wyoming.
a great Republican leader. And he says, as I'm standing there, he says, Alan, Steve is going to be chief counsel of Judiciary. You have any problems with Judiciary, call him, and he'll try to help. I got that message.
It doesn't
did.
work. It apparently
No, he called.
doesn't work that way today. Apparently, we're looking at history 50 years ago. Times have apparently changed today in that degree of collegiality and camaraderie. Do you have any comment on that, or you observe it like anybody else does and are quizzical about why it
I know
is?
what the senator thought. I mean, years ago, he said to us, the problem with the Senate today, this was as it was changing, he said, is the jet plane.
It's the
It's the jet plane. Why? Because with the jet plane, the senators are in Washington for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Thursday evening, they have to go back to Chicago, or they have to go back to Des Moines or Idaho or somewhere, because if they're not there over the weekend, then somebody will run against them, say he isn't concerned about your problems, he's never here. And by the way, if he does spend all his time there, they'll say, you see, he never shows up for a vote. All right, so it's tough to be a senator. But that jet plane means you can travel. And if you can travel, you better. And if you're not, if you do, you're not going to know your fellow senators as well. And if you don't know them as human beings, it's just harder, I think. I know what Kennedy said about these things. I mean, he'd say, he believed this. He'd said the Republicans and the Democrats are alike in that they both want to help people. They wouldn't be in public life if they didn't put a high priority on that. Now, they may have different views about how to go about it, but that is a basic motivation. Now, I'd heard, too, from another senator who became a very great senator, and when he first got there, he was on the floor, and Senator Helms was saying something rather critical of Senator Kennedy. I think this is a true story. I can't guarantee it. I didn't hear it myself, but I've heard it from enough people. And Helms was being very critical, and this new senator didn't like it very much, and he said some mean things about Helms. Goes back to his office, the phone rings, and it's Senator Mansfield, who was the leader of the Democrats, who asked him to come to his office. So he goes to the office, and Mansfield says, I don't want to hear you ever say those critical things of another senator. He said, but he said such terrible things about Kennedy. Well, says the leader, what you don't know is Senator Helms' wife last week was diagnosed with a very serious form of cancer. He called Kennedy, and Kennedy arranged in Boston for the greatest expert in the country to take her under his care. He said, remember that, because politics is one thing, and human relations is another. Yeah, it's stuck in his mind. That's right.
Now, during your tenure on the committee, were there any Supreme Court confirmation hearings?
I don't think there were.
And I don't think there were either.
No, I think the major one that we had, we might have had Attorney General. We had Deputy Attorney General was Renfrew. And Renfrew, for some reason, he's a great guy. I mean, he was fun. Charlie Renfrew.
Right.
And he had written an article when he was young about different groups of people and their relation to the law or something like that. Somewhere in that article, there slipped a line which said there are not as many lawyers in China because Chinese don't have the same respect for the law. So we first came across that when the Asian Pacific Lawyers Association called up my office. What? He said, what? So I call in Charlie and say, look, we've got to do something about this. I'm sure you didn't mean anything harmful by it, but please, my God. So we call in a meeting. We're going to have a meeting with the Asian Pacific Bar and Renfrew, and he's going to explain the whole thing. See, he had a very good sense of humor, but sometimes that got carried away. All right, so the head of the bar says, well, where did you get this idea? Where did you get this idea that they're not a respect for law, or whatever the words were? They weren't that bad, but they were not the word respect. Whatever it was bad enough out there. And so Charlie says, oh, a Chinese friend of mine told me. Or I said, end of meeting, we're going home, goodbye, we'll see you later. Or anyway, he turned out to be confirmed, and he was a good.
Now, how do you react? This is a little far afield, we'll get back to the committee, but how do you react today about the Senate confirmation process now, particularly among justices, confirmation, but this is so on another universe from what you went through, what Ruth Ginsburg went through.
That's true.
How do you react to, or what is your recommendation, perhaps, as to how this can become a little bit more civil and a little bit more on the merits, a little bit more less emotional, shall we say?
My recommendation is to the fifth graders or the high school students. Why? Because I think what we learned there, my actual confirmation, it was supposed to be an easy confirmation. Senator Kennedy was sitting there. Didn't feel that way if you sit in a table and there's 17 senators on one side and you're on the other side. I mean, that's not a cheerful situation. Even if they told you it's going to be easy, and there are people listening on television. There were several millions. And luckily, I was extremely boring, and they turned it off. Perfect, because you don't know how I think, but it's a hope that American people are pretty tolerant, and they will, in fact, allow people, at least at that time, to be confirmed whom they don't agree with a lot of things, but they think they're honest people and will do their best. And I was told by Mike Berman, who was sort of shepherding this, he said, look, here's what you do. You're not on that table, you're not there to show how clever you are. You're not trying to earn some points, you're trying to get confirmed. So you tell what you would tell any client who's going to testify in court. You listen to the question. You think about what you're going to say. And then say it. They can't make you do it quickly, but think it through and then say it. And answer the question completely. And when you've answered it, they'll go to the next question. And you do the same. And the senator will run out of questions. And then they will go to the next senator. And he and you will do the same thing. And then they'll reach the last senator, and you will be confirmed. That's what he told me. Okay. A friend of ours, Dorothy Zinberg, up in Cambridge, was listening to the hearing. She said, you know, the painter came in the other day. He's been painting my house, and he was listening to it too. And he said, is there something wrong with Breyer? He seems sick. He takes a long time to answer any question. It's all right. You will get confirmed, said Berman, and I was. And of course it's nervous. Of course it makes me nervous. Of course it did. But what I think, and that comes out of several, 2 or 3 years there, I think that the senators will, in fact, ask the kinds of questions their constituents want asked. And if they do not, they won't be senators for too long. So the people I want the 5th graders to talk to, or the 12th graders, or their parents, and the ones I want them to listen to are not necessarily senators. They are the people who will go out and vote for those people. And you want to see the country turn a certain way, you have to convince those people. And they will then be an electoral base. That's called democracy. And what I saw in action in those times is democracy at work. And Kennedy also said the country swings from time to time. It swings back and forth. And sometimes it swings too far, and then too far over here, but it does change direction and it doesn't reach disaster. And that's what Churchill said. It's famous. He said, America always does the right thing after trying every other possibility.
Now, let me ask you, how did your days on the Senate Judiciary Committee, the legislative process, working daily for Senator Kennedy, how did that shape your approach to judicial decision-making?
No,
A
I
good
get there
question.
early. It's a good question. I'd come in at 7 in the morning on my bicycle. And because I liked it. It was so interesting. Things were going on all the time. And it's really what I basically said. You're with a group of people. They're trying to work out a problem. Small group, fine. Listen. The conference does not work in the Supreme Court if someone across the table has the impression that what I'm saying is really, ha, 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 I have a better argument than you. All that will do is lead that person to think, ha, I have a better argument than you. And that will get us nowhere. But when that conference has worked well, it's worked well because I've listened, or people have listened to what the other person is saying. You don't have to agree with it, but you listen to where they're coming from. And then when you work out what they're coming from, if you're going to say something again, because no one talks until everybody's had one chance to talk. But nobody talks twice till everybody's spoken once. All right, then we have some discussion, and that discussion will work if you've really taken in where the other person is coming from. And then you try to produce something that will be helpful given that fact. And it doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. And I think that is seeing how he worked in that office. And really, when he says to you, or he says to me, work it out, we have an idea what he has in mind. And we'll do our best to work it out. and sometimes we succeed.
The Kennedy alum know this from personal experience, but in working it out, I would occasionally go to Senator Kennedy and say, Senator, you got to study this a little bit better because there's a hearing tomorrow. And he would look at me and he'd smile and he'd say, remember this, I don't have to know this the way you do. I just have to know it better than 51 senators or whatever it is.
And he did. Yeah, we did do quite a lot of work. We produced these black books, which had in them the issue and what the pros and what the cons were, along with some recommendations, which he might not always take, and some more often he probably would take them. But he had 3 choices, and he'd figure that out.
Now we can't have an hour like this without, I think most people know the story, but there's some in the audience that don't. One perfect example of how you worked so well, not only with Kennedy and the staff, but with the Republicans on the committee. Explain a little bit the story of how you, through sheer happenstance, really, became nominated and approved for the First Circuit Court of Appeals.
Yeah, I did become I was nominated, and Ken thought of it and told me. I think so. Yeah. All right, but you see, we had been trying. Really, there was a vacancy on the First Circuit, which is New England and Puerto Rico, and we wanted Archie Cox nominated. And the Bar Association said he was too old or something, and we didn't know if that was really a good reason, and we'd worked pretty hard, but that wasn't going to happen. And so then Civility, I think, was the AG, wasn't he?
No, Griffin Bell.
No, sorry. Well, I don't know. Whoever
it was.
Said, which perhaps was not too wise, we want someone from Puerto Rico. Now, why was that not too wise? We did want someone from Puerto Rico. But Senator Chafee, who was from Rhode Island, said, can't you at least mention Rhode Island? You know, what are they going to think of me? You see, there was a little concern about that. But nonetheless, after a couple of months, it was clear that the Puerto Rican bar was divided, and so they wouldn't come up. By this time, it's August or September, and the election is coming up with Ronald Reagan running, and it was a seat from Massachusetts. And Ken said, what's wrong with Steve? So Kennedy says, no, nothing. So that is what happened.
No.
That isn't what happened?
This
I was just hiding.
This was after, you'll recall, after President Reagan defeated President Carter. And the idea that that First Circuit vacancy would now go to a Democrat when Reagan was the heir apparent and Strom Thurmond was chairman of the minority, saying, well, leave it vacant and we'll fill it with a Republican. And then what happened, I'll never forget this. We suggested Stephen. After the election, Reagan is the guy now who's appointing judge or is about to appoint judges once he's sworn in. And we raised with Senator Kennedy, Stephen Breyer. And Breyer and Kennedy went to Thurmond. And Thurmond said, you've heard about Breyer, Stephen Breyer's approach to the Judiciary Committee, working with Republicans. Thurmond said, I like that idea. I'll let one, there may be 2 or 3 others, I'll let one vacancy be filled during the Carter administration when Carter's a lame duck. And Thurmond rounded up all the Republicans. And Kennedy went to Stu Eisenstadt and said, Stu, tell President Carter we can fill that First Circuit lame duck. We can fill that First Circuit if we have the right nominee, Stephen Breyer. And Eisenstadt said, well, you'll never get that done because Thurmond and the Republicans. And Kennedy said, I'll take care of Thurmond and the Republicans. You take care of President Carter. And that's what happened. And he made it.
It took a little.
He made it. Of course, the fact is that, as Stephen could explain, in previous months or a year, his young kids ice skated with Thurman's kids on weekends, and they spent some time together there too. So, all
Those
right.
are good days, those are-
Now, I've got a series of questions that Alan Morrison and some of the students have put together. We have a little bit of time, and I'd like to ask these questions. I haven't talked to these students, but they're very good questions. Senator Kennedy was one of the most influential progressive politicians in United States history. How did his progressive sentiments influence your jurisprudence?
I don't know. I think I probably learned from him that the important thing is it's accomplishing something for people who are citizens or not citizens. Could be, immigrants of the United States. You want to accomplish something, and I don't care whether you call it progressive or liberal or conservative. Call it what you want, but ultimately. It's in that accomplishment that you will find personal satisfaction. I heard him say this. I heard him say it at the big reunion of the whole staff up at Hyannis one year. And Cary Barker wrote a lot of his speeches, but he didn't write that one. And he said to the staff, former staff who gathered, he said his father gave him some advice that he took to heart. He said, what you do is you get a staff. Look for people who won't all think the same thing. But what they'll do is they'll try to help. Help is the word. They'll help each other. They will help you. They will help themselves. But they will try to help get something that helps people in America. Now, people can have different ideas about what that is, but they don't always stick, nor did he, to what a newspaper might write in an editorial as this is the progressive view or this is the conservative view. The key to it is to try to help. And so when I get questions, as I do, my grandson is here, Ansel Scholl. I talked to his class once when they were all in the 5th grade. I got questions like that. He said, what do we do? I said, I'm sorry, my friend, Mr. 5th grader. How you help, it's now up to you. We've done our bit, maybe. And maybe we can do a little more, maybe we can't. But you're the ones. Because that man up there, where is he? There he is. Right. I found a letter of his, and he said in that letter that this country, which he had to be persuaded by Hamilton and the others to preside over the Constitutional Convention, which he did, but he said it's an experiment. And that's what Lincoln said. That's why Ansel and the others had to, my wife said, I'm going to give $20 to any grandchild who memorizes the Gettysburg Address. And some of them did. He says, why? Because it says right in those first 2 lines, 7 years ago, our fathers set forth upon this nation, created, a new nation, conceived in liberty, those are the words, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. We are now engaged in a great war to see if that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. Because all these French people in the Enlightenment and in Scotland, they had all kinds of theories. They were good theories. They're written into that Constitution. But they might have thought, oh good, the United States will try it. Ha ha, they'll never succeed. Well, Lincoln, Washington, the others thought, yes, we can. Yes, we can. We can succeed. But what I want them to take in that 5th grade or now in college at Georgetown or wherever he is, yeah, we can concede. Maybe. We're still in that experiment. And now what I want to tell the people of that age, it's now mostly up to you. You're going to have to figure out how to do it. Because we've had our ups and downs, but we can succeed. And that's the message. I found it in his letter. My wife found it in the Gettysburg Address, and I think we saw it and found it working for Ted Kennedy.
Next question from a student. How did your Senate Judiciary Committee experience inform your views on money in politics and campaign financing?
But there was less. I mean, maybe there wasn't less. I don't know. What I know more is, look, if one person gives $5 million, I put this in an opinion at one point, to a candidate, and the other can only give $5, I know whose door is going to be open to whom. And I don't see anything wrong with lobbying as long as you're fair in the lobbying and you get everybody in there, whether they think this or whether they think that. But there is a problem. There is a problem. And the problem is if the door is open to a few and not open to the others. And a more personal thing, when I'm there, I go into my office. And there is a young woman in there, and she's going through all the papers on my desk. That made me annoyed. I mean, why is this woman going through all the papers on my desk? So I said, can I help you, in a slightly annoyed tone of voice? And she said, well, I'm a student, and I wanted to see what it's like here, so I just thought I'd look and see what you did. That didn't exactly cheer me up. And so I started to say something, and then I thought, wait. She might be a constituent. That's a thought that occurs to you from time to time when you're working in the United States Senate. Because you really are close to that. And you see there what you don't see in other jobs necessarily. The more direct connection between the, quote, people of the United States, those constituents, and the individuals who will try to take their opinion, their public opinion, that public opinion that is created through free speech and press and so forth, and shaped, and they will try to work with it. Sure. And that in part shapes the view that there better be equal chances. They'll never be perfectly equal, but come as close as you can. So that unfortunate woman, I didn't criticize her, I stopped in time. She and her parents and a lot of others too will have an opportunity to work in public life, to spend some time there, to try to shape public opinion, and try to see that the laws of the United States are reflecting what the public wants and that they live up to that Constitution, which in, I guess, 1863 or in 1860. No, it wasn't the Constitution. When he said 77 years ago, he was referring to the Declaration of Independence. Why the Declaration and not the Constitution? Because the Declaration, but not the Constitution, says all men are created equal. And he meant women, too. They would have.
Next question from a student. Which of your Senate Judiciary Committee experiences influenced your approach to the checks and balances of power between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary?
That's a good question.
Very good question.
Probably when we had a really tough hearing on a nominee, either Tommy or Duke or somebody had discovered that he had a rather checkered background that might carry over into the days of his being a judge if he was confirmed. I think he represented some people in the cigarette racket, was that it, which was not a desirable thing, and many of them were in jail, but he would take their advice and would plead guilty, lower people in the ring, so they didn't say anything bad about the higher people in the ring. And we tried to get that particular senator to go have him re-examined by the ABA, and he didn't want to do it. So what did we do? We had hearings. And Leahy chaired the hearing, and Hatch. Republican, Democrat. And you went and got the person out of jail. You got him out of jail, and he came into our courtroom.
To testify.
Yeah, to testify about what had gone on. And it wasn't too desirable what had gone on. And it ended up really for one of the very few times in history where the Senate Judiciary Committee voted against him, a nominee from a president of the same party.
You see, many people in this room hear these stories and reflect on their years with Senator Kennedy in the Senate. And it's sort of, I think, sort of these days in particular, in contrast, rather uplifting. The way the institution worked back then. Ira Shapiro wrote a great book on the great Senate of the 60s and 70s, civil rights in Vietnam, and voting rights, etc. And these stories sort of bring back memory of what could have been. Or what could
things were going on. I mean, this was happening as real time. I was sitting there at the typewriter while writing a memo about what just happened in the hearing. And the upshot was that the Senate, I thought, then did work. There was no nominee for a job in another part of the government, which other part of the government would have had power over people. And probably the president, when he was nominated, didn't know all the facts, because we found out quite a few. And so there we have a check and a balance, you see. And we're not going to let somebody go into that federal judiciary who had this particular record, and maybe the president missed it, but the Senate didn't miss it. And all three branches are involved there, and you need a check and a balance. You need it. And that's a system that is not going to work very efficiently. But the longer you're in that Supreme Court, and the longer you work in the Senate, the more you're likely to think, efficiency isn't everything. And having a system of checks, and no one becomes too powerful, and you have backups and various things, it can help. That's the example that occurred to me. But I think that is a feeling.
Is there any single book or written work which you encountered throughout your legal career, which you wish you would have read in your first year of law school?
You don't have time to read anything in your first year of law school. I'll tell you that. The books that I usually recommend to students or others, I think everybody should read The Education of Henry Adams. I think everybody should read that. Born in 1838, died probably in the 2020s, sometimes like 1920s. But you see, he lived through that Civil War. He went to a lot of different states. He said, democracy, it doesn't work. And then he thought, well, may work better than our alternatives. And I learned a lot reading that book. The books I liked, I read some literature. Books I like, I love The Age of Innocence. I think that's a very, very interesting, very good book that tells some differences between the United States and Europe. And you see it. And I also like Willa Cather. But I'm saying these, I like Willa Cather, I like The Professor's House, because I'm from the West. The professor in that book goes, when he's young, he travels out to New Mexico, and he goes up on some kind of a mesa, and he looks out, and there it is. There is that country in the West. That country you can see painted in the paintings of what's his name, Church or whatever. And it's an extraordinary country. So big, so huge, very beautiful in many different ways, with all kinds of people in it. Every race, every religion, every point of view. My mother used to say that. That's why we have a First Amendment. There's no view, she used to say, that was so crazy. But there isn't someone in this country who doesn't hold it. And since we lived in San Francisco, she said they all live in Los Angeles. But nonetheless, it is, read some of those novels, and you'll see something about this country that you'll not otherwise experience, the hugeness of it. And read Henry Adams, and you'll see how this country has developed from a few people from England and not many other places to from everywhere. You'll see it happening, because Henry Adams does in that book think, and you see him think it. I don't like democracy, but what's the choice? Yeah, that's right. That's right. There we are.
Next question. With respect to your successful work on airline deregulation, to what extent is that success limited only to airline deregulation? Don't we need more industry-wide government regulation today, specifically regarding rising costs and falling reliability?
No, I don't know the answer to that, obviously. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. That was the book on the airline dereg. The thing I remember the most, we wanted to allow price competition. United, see, at every company I learned over time, there's one person who really understands the industry and understands the company, and he's never the president, okay? So we got a letter from Vice President Andy DeBorny. He says, if you go ahead with this airline dereg and start allowing people to compete in price, we're going to cut out 380 routes. So Kennedy says, what's this? So I said, I'll go out and see. So we go out to Chicago and we meet with him and we go over it route by route, 2 or 3 of us, and he agrees most of them he won't cut. So I said, how many are you really going to cut? He said, well, we might be somewhere 70 or 80. I said, we can give you a subsidy of $80 million, and then you won't have to cut any. He says, that's true. And he said, you know, Stephen, I've been looking into this, and I've come to the conclusion that you're right. He did say that. He said, what will happen? He said, you'll succeed. You will succeed. And when there is competition, the airlines will fill up. There won't be empty seats. And because there are no empty seats, the prices will fall. And they'll fall a lot. So you will have what you're looking for. You will have lower prices. You'll have fuller airlines, and you, Stephen, will hate it. Well, he had a point. He had a point. But there we are. That was what we were trying to do, and it may not be the most pleasant thing in the world, but when Paul McAvoy tried to start an airline that was going to be really comfortable and only half price, or 2/3 price or something, he went bankrupt. People want the lower price. Okay?
Yeah.
I say that really requires courage, because I say that after having been 3 hours late to get down here from Cambridge. Okay.
Here's a tough question for you. In all of your years working with Senator Kennedy, do you have a favorite memory, a time with Senator Kennedy that you will remember for as long as you live?
There are quite a few. I mean, I like that meeting that they had with the staff up in Hyannis, because I thought he was saying what he really thought about helping. I liked that. I liked a dinner that I was invited to at his house in Georgetown, where he had, who is the man who's in Don Quixote, you know, the singer?
His favorite, yeah.
Yeah. What?
No, not
No,
Richard
it's
Kiley.
not Richard. He sang Man of La Mancha.
Well, everybody flunked this question, but go ahead anyway.
Well, I liked it, and I remembered it up until a minute ago. But what? Yeah, exactly. Brian Stokes Mitchell, and he was there, and he was singing "Man of La Mancha," and Kennedy liked to sing. And Littlefield used to. He and Littlefield used to go around. They would sing Irish songs, and you see, it was fun. He was fun, and he was serious, but he didn't take himself too seriously. And I think it was that. And you knew you had to work hard on the staff, but when you got something done, when you were in the process of achieving something that he sort of liked and felt would be helpful, he'd give you what? His most precious thing was his time. And suddenly there he'd be. God, even learning the price regulation. Jeez, I felt guilty about that one, because I wasn't certain that was his favorite, but And you didn't know he was funny. He had a sense of humor. I think what was the reason he helped get me appointed to the Supreme Court is he calls me on one day, and Tom Winship was there. Tom Winship was the editor of the Globe. The Globe, the Boston Globe, was pretty important to him. And for some reason, they had gotten into a conversation about law school and property law. And so he said to me, what is the difference between a shifting and a springing use? Well, by some... That's why he appointed me, there's no doubt. I mean, through some total fluke, I had a very good property professor, A. James Kasner, and he loved springing and shifting uses. So I actually knew what the difference was. I might not know much else, but there was a springing use went this way or something, and the other one went the other way. So I explained it. And he said, oh, you really knew that? So then for the next month, whenever he saw me, he'd go like this, you see.
Here's a very a question that obviously comes from a George Washington Law School student. There are two of them, actually.
Yeah.
First, what made you decide to work for Senator Kennedy in Congress for little pay, as opposed to making millions in the private sector?
I've always worked for little pay. I've worked for the government for a long time, and I also taught, and at the time I went into teaching, they actually paid less than the government paid for working for them. They paid more by the time I left again to work in the government. So there's something in my brain that's gone bananas and seems to be attracted to little pay. Actually, I don't think about it too much, except when I want to go to a restaurant or something. I don't think about it too much. And you can have lots of satisfactory lives. You don't have to work for. I do think many people I know have had very satisfactory lives, and you do not have to work either for the poorest good doer in the world or the richest man in the world, who I gather now is, I don't know who it is, but whoever it is. You can, and that's what's one of the great things about being a lawyer. And Dick Guggenheim told me this. One summer I worked in San Francisco for a law firm. It was his law firm. He says, you will not make an enormous amount of money being a lawyer. Maybe that's changed, but you won't. But you'll make enough. You'll make enough. And when it comes time to send your children to college, we'll pay you enough so you can send them to college. And it's interesting being a lawyer. And you have to use that head, and you have to use your heart. And everybody has a heart, but not everybody has that determination, let's say, to get through law school. And you have both. And when you have both and put those two things together, it's a wonderful career. It's a wonderful career. I'm not here to advertise Listerine toothpaste or law, but it is a good career. And if you put money first, go into business. No problem. You can do that. Nothing wrong with it. But you want to go into law? Fine. I mean, I found it, even were I not, I mean, of course you can say, well, I was appointed to the Supreme Court. But even had that not happened, it's still a very, very, very interesting, worthwhile, and public service career.
Sort of a related question from a second-year law student.
Yeah.
I am undecided on how to pursue a particular law school career, a law career. How were you able to identify your priorities and passions in the legal field?
Well, I was a law clerk, and then I went to work in the Justice Department in the Antitrust Division, which I found very, very interesting. And then I received some job offers to teach, which I thought might be, I thought I'd like that. But where should I teach, and how should I do it, and should I do it now? The best advice I got was from Bayless Manning, who was dean at Stanford. It's worth remembering, I thought. He said, you know, he said, when you make a lot of important decisions when you're fairly young. He said, but for each of those decisions, such as where are you going to practice law and what kind and so forth, he said, you're never going to know more than about 5 or 10% of what you'd really like to know and what would really benefit you to know before you make your decision. But you won't know it. And there's no way to know it. So, 1, lighten up. 2, decide. I think you should not decide to be a tightrope walker unless you have some special skill. But within a broad range, you're not going to go wrong. And you will decide. And then when you do decide, your life sort of wraps itself around your decision. And you'll have some happy days, and you'll have some days that are not happy. And that happens to everybody. And that's true no matter what their career. So lighten up. You learn what you can. It'll be a small amount compared to what you would like to learn, and then you decide. That's just what it is.
Our last question, because we want to stick to the timetable here, from a student. Our last question, which you have commented, at least indirectly, throughout the last hour and a half. How has increased political polarization in our country hindered the work of the Senate Judiciary Committee and the judicial confirmation process?
Yeah, too much. Too much. I mean, yes, the parties are important. Of course, parties are important. Both parties are important. They're all important. But ultimately, they have to work together. So I have no brilliant insight on that. But I am, look, when have I lived? I have lived from really the end of World War II till now. And I've been lucky to live then because we had certain ideals as a country, and I think we still have them. At the end of World War II, with the Marshall Plan, Dean Acheson, all the people who created our foreign policy, we're going to try to have a world where there is basic human rights protection, basic equality, a rule of law, some free trade, and working together with other countries who think alike. And by doing that, we will create a world that is more desirable. That's what we learned. That's what we've lived through pretty much. And we're lucky to have done that. And there's no reason, in my mind, why people can't still do it. And I think they should. But I think the job of doing it is their job. It's the next generation. They're the ones that are going to have to get out there in public life, as I hope they will. They have to get out there and decide how to do it.
I've learned that in these interviews with Stephen Breyer, professor and friend Alan Morrison always gets the last word. So, Alan, you're on.
Thank you, and I won't say very many last words, but I want to thank Ken Feinberg and Justice Breyer for a fascinating, insightful turn about the time you spent with Senator Kennedy. And so, can we give him another round of applause? Thank you. And for the students here, I have a reminder that next Tuesday at 9:30 in the Burns Moot Court Room, we're going to have a preview of the Supreme Court term this coming year, and I hope that we'll see many of you there. Thanks, and thank you again for coming.